Okay, with Coach2K.com, and in this video, I wanted to talk about defensive settings and my philosophy on um, their use in the game and kind of what I do with them, and to give you a better feeling for why I do what I do when it comes to the defensive settings. Now, before I begin, I just wanted to kind of tell you where I come from with regards to this issue, and that's from a league perspective and not so much from a play now or a my team oriented kind of philosophy. When you're trying to get people on the court actually playing each other, which is really one of the main purposes of why I set up Coach 2K in the first place, is to get people on the court actually playing, and not only playing, but playing teams that they um, that not everybody else is using. If you go into play now, for example, you're going to face the same teams all the time. You're never going to face a guy using one of the subpar teams unless he's just like super good at 2K and super good at a lot of the other ways to use the game. So when you're trying to get guys on the court, uh, the biggest problem is just kind of keeping everybody happy because everybody has such a short fuse. So tolerance when it comes to playing people in 2K is probably the least lacked skill in the community, because the moment somebody sees something that they don't like, their first tendency is just to quit. And you can't develop a league around a bunch of people that want to quit. You got to have people that play all the time. And from having people come in and play games and leave over a period of time, I can tell you that most of the complaints weren't related to, he was doing this on offense all the time. I mean, most of the time it was just guys getting frustrated by the tactics that were used against them when it came to how people play them on defense. Because a lot of guys would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm a sim player," and what they would do is, on offense they were great, but when it came to defense, back when the 1-3-1 was in there, and they were always trapping, and their defense was just atrocious, and people would just get so frustrated by it they just quit. So I've got kind of a different definition of sim basketball than most people do, and my first goal is to keep people from complaining, or to give them as very little to complain about as possible. And now I don't know, I'm not always successful at doing that, but one of the ways I do that is just by playing straight up defense with no CPU assistance at all, and I just take whatever happens to me on the court defensively, and I just try and deal with it by running a good offense. Now, one of the things I've noticed about NBA 2K is you can go in these defensive settings, and you can just tweak these like crazy, and you can find a way for just about every guy on your team to stop anything that the other guy might want to do when it comes to using that player. But it's really not necessary. And to me, it's just a form of letting the computer play defense for you. Now, there are situations where it does make sense to play somebody tied if they're getting left all the time, but most of the time the errors that you see on defense aren't really, I'm not going to say all the time, but a lot of times you can reduce the number of things that you don't like to see happen to your team defensively just by not getting out of position on yourself on the ball. So what happens is people find themselves getting out of position on the ball handler if they're an on-ball defensive player, and then their team defense breaks down. You'll see guys will play, they'll have their point guard out, pressing you full court. They get beat, and so a lot of this stuff that people try and correct with defensive settings. So 90% of the people that I play, I can beat by never touching these settings at all, because in my opinion, these settings, they're just they allow any guy who uses any team to make that team kind of a lockdown what I always say, make that team play above their head defensively. And while that is important, I think if um, you want to win every single game, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to win every single game. What happens is that people that you play, if you need to play them over and over and over in a league setting, we'll just go, I don't play that guy. So um, this is the main reason that I don't use the defensive settings, is just to kind of reduce people having any kind of issue with the way that they're being played. The other thing that I have noticed over time, and people won't agree with me on, is that if I have the defensive on-ball pressure here set to auto, um, and I'm getting killed, and then I go in here and I just set this to tight, for example, um, that'll cause, just having that setting set to tight, that'll cause my offensive player to um, miss shots even when the defensive isn't around them. So, I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but this is just a computer after all. Just setting the setting is all it takes sometimes. You don't even have to guard the guy. And the other thing that all these settings do, I think, is just sometimes I'll play guys where there's just, I might have the ball and I may not have proper spacing, and I'll have like 5 guys in front of me, and you can't get the ball to the other guys on the court. So now I'm not saying you can't deal with these settings. The good thing about playing people who do use the defensive settings is that from on the offensive side of the ball, I never really mind if people use the settings, because what it forces me to do is to learn how to deal with the defense that's being played against me. And so over the course of a year, I can start to recognize how I'm being played defensively and play ball accordingly. So, but on defense, I just take whatever happens to me on defense, and if I can beat you strictly on auto defense, that's what I do. And I can tell you that playing the CPU, that I've beaten the Hall of Fame CPU never touching anything. So my goal when I play is to do the best I can just to make sure that that guy that I play will play me again and not necessarily beat him down. So anyway, that's kind of my philosophy on the settings and why I don't use them. And the other thing I probably should mention too is that when you do play like this and you do you don't adjust the settings, it kind of forces you to figure out, if you're playing on ball almost all the time, which you should, it kind of forces you how and what really proper defensive positioning is, because you can learn where to put your guy in such a way that your defense doesn't break down. And the other thing is that when it comes to defense, your defense is really driven by your offense in the game. So if you're scoring on offense, it's much easier to have success with not using any settings than it is if you don't and you're playing somebody that is. So if you can't score on offense, then it really doesn't matter whether you're setting your settings or not, because that's the biggest key to driving your defense, because you need your defense to have all 5 guys down there playing. And if you're not scoring and the other team is getting turnovers and being able to get down court off of missed shots, I mean, you're already at a disadvantage. So it doesn't even matter what your defensive settings are. So anyway, I hope that gives you some perspective as to why I don't use the defensive settings. It doesn't mean that if you use them that I think you're a horrible player, but I think that a lot of people that are really, really, really good at 2K could do just fine without also using the settings. So anyway, that's my opinion on the defensive settings, and I hope that helps you. And if you ever want to play, let me know. I'm Coach 2K, and I will see you on the court.